Whiteboard Wednesday. So we got another episode for you, of course. So anyway, right, today we're going to be discussing this idea of my, right? M-A-I, M-A-A-I, my, not my, right? My, right? When I was first starting out in this art, there were just a couple of really key principles that were highlighted as like the top things, right? So we had my, which is normally conventionally translated as distance. Sometimes there's some other things in there, but we really want to break this thing down, right? Nagare, flow, ritsudo, sometimes translated as timing, but it also points to like the rhythm or the breath of the fight, right? So again, this is one of those really, really key kind of things. And in different arts, different names might be used. It's always right? But there's central kind of things. Like in art, we use this concept of kuraidori, right? Taking proper position, kind of. I'll talk about that a little bit more as I go along. But so doesn't look like I have a whole lot here, but we're going to go deep. Okay, so Hatsumi Sensei, right? 34th Grandmaster of the Togakure School and still head of the Bujinkan Dojo, my teacher, has always said, he who controls the distance controls the fight. Okay? I don't think a lot of people give much thought to that, right? And I'll talk about that in a minute, right? He thought that was so important that if you've seen any of his videos, right, the Quest series, it comes out from this company, this production company called Quest. So there's a whole bunch. I lost count as to how many numbers or how many volumes or editions or whatever there are. But in the opening titles, when it pops up, it says Mahasaki Hatsumi's Martial Arts of Distance. Okay, that's a key piece, all right? So, and again, all goes back to this: he who controls the distance controls the fight. Okay, so as usual, we're going to start big picture, and then we're going to kind of move into an area where, I always start off with a problem, but midway there ends up being another problem with the conventional way of doing things, right? Now, if you're new to this and you're just looking for ways to fight like everybody else and just be trickier, or you get that one little secret that the guys online are selling you, that course, right, where you learn this one secret and you'll be able to beat anyone within 30 minutes. I'm not your guy. You know where that back button is on your browser? Hit that. See you later. Okay. If you're still here, well, let's dive in. Okay. So here's a problem as I see it. This is always as I see it, right? And again, this is not me being a spectator on a couch watching MMA fights and whatnot, or having been just in high school or whatever, right? And we're talking about a law enforcement career dealing with the worst of the worst. This is talking about, having to apprehend and or otherwise deal with really violent people, okay? And using this stuff in real life, okay? So not just talking about it, not just making it happen in the dojo, okay? Not ringing my bell, just makes a difference when we're having discussions, okay? And just like I would not have a discussion, shift my camera here, just like I would not have a discussion with my 4-year-old grandson about how the engine in my car works, I'm not gonna have a discussion with someone who has a single-pointed mindset about how a fight's supposed to happen, especially if that mindset is either based on no experience whatsoever, they've just got their opinion, and we know about opinions, right? Okay? Or they've only ever been in one type, and that's all they know, okay? Just talking with some black belts the other day that, this huge difference, and people will throw these words around between fight and self-defense or whatever, but their mind is still the same. And if you look at any of the comments under any of these videos that I've done, I don't care if you buy into the lesson or whatever, look at the comment and try to see that it's coming from a very specific place, a very specific ideology, view, whatever, right? I don't care if they're open-minded or not, okay? But what I see more often than not are folks that have this belief that when they get into a quote-unquote fight, right, or they're forced to protect themselves or someone else, right, it's always going to be the same way. right? We're just going to use some fists and all that kind of stuff, right? Somebody might throw a chair, whatever, right? But there's never a consideration that that fist fight or that grappling situation on the floor could turn into somebody pulling out a knife and doing some extra perforations. Or, you know, you start to win, he stumbles back and draws something and shoots you in the face, right? But that's the reality of warfare, right? I just used this phrase again last night in class, right? My upper level group, right? It was just that they were pissing me off, okay? So I just stopped at one point and looked around and said, what part of the word martial do you not understand? Okay, this is not game playing. Martial means warfare. Okay, that means that somebody's not going home. Okay, so we're training to make sure it's not us that's not going home. Okay, so anyway, right? So again, who controls the distance controls the fight. But here's this problem that I see, right? Most fighters stay in either a toe-to-toe position, right, where they're trading shots, right, well within range of the opponent's weapons, right? Or they rush into a grappling scenario, and then either guy, right, either fighter is trying to be tricky from that position. Okay, well, tricky may be all you have because you're not using anything close to this, right? There's an unspoken belief about what the range should be, right? Which means I can hit him with a jab or he can hit me with a jab. And what I'm going to do is play this ducking, bobbing kind of thing and hoping that he doesn't hit me. Or every once in a while we'll reset and then we'll come back into that same range, right? But again, we've talked about this in other lessons. Everybody's focusing on certain targets, right? These are weapons, right? No, if he's not throwing it, it's not a weapon, okay? So they'll move into position because they're trying to score points or they're trying to get the knockout or whatever when they're leaving these things open. Yeah, but Sensei, it doesn't hurt him when I hit there. Well, no shit, not if you're wearing gloves. Okay? There's a lot of things that are not possible in a self-defense situation if all you ever train for is trading shots with safety equipment. Okay, because I promise, right? I once had a Golden Glove boxer one time. He was in my military police unit, and we were talking about self-defense, and everybody and their fucking brother, every time the subject comes up, they have to throw out something that tells you that they know what they're talking about, right? They were in this kind of a fight, kicked that guy's ass or whatever. Sure enough, right? This guy was a Golden Glove boxer, right? Fantastic, okay? And he says, I remember most memorable lesson my teacher, coach, ever told me was never punch a guy in the chest. It doesn't hurt. Okay. So he came to class and he ran into a fist on the breastbone. Okay. And he was buckled over, not breathing very well. And I thought maybe he was injured. Well, he was injured. Ego was injured. It was painful, right? And I said, are you okay? And from up on the other side of his skull, what I heard was, he lied. No, he didn't lie. He's teaching you in the context of having gloves. 5 inches of cotton on your knuckles, hitting somebody in the chest? Yeah, no. Okay? But if I catch these things, better yet, instead of hitting the sternum, if I go just to the side of the sternum with the ribs plug in, oh, that's beautiful. Okay? But so part of this belief, I believe, right? Part of this belief is based on what they see in these sport contests, right? Like boxing, MMA, whatever, right? When in that context, you get penalized for not engaging, right? So you can't like stay away and force him to overreach or whatever, right? You're supposed to stay in there or you get points again. You can get disqualified, right? Fight's over. You fucking lost because you're not fighting. Because after all, everybody bought a ticket because they paid to watch a fight. And if you're not going to be slinging and he's, say, right? So they want to see a contest, right? But we're not talking about a fight, right? We're not talking about a contest, right? We're talking about surviving a real world encounter, right? And just in case you don't know what real combat looks like, well, there's lots of examples out in the world. However, if you've ever seen the movie The 300, right? It was about the Spartans that held off the entire freaking Persian world for how many days, right? It's 300 of them, okay? But in the movie, all of the battlefield scenes were just this solid color, like red or whatever, and then everybody was just a silhouette, right? They silhouetted the bodies in action, right? And you didn't have people moving around, and you can't do that shit on a battlefield, right? You got to drop this guy and keep moving, because if you hang out, one of his friends are going to poke you with a spear or snap your leg out from under you or whatever and call it a damn day, right? So in these scenes, they're just running by and they'll hack off an arm or a leg. Every once in a while will be a head or whatever, but there wasn't even a whole lot of like impaling the body, because your sword can get stuck, right? So yeah, but you only cut off his leg. You didn't kill him. Well, not in this moment, but he's going to bleed out. Okay. So, and that's the reality, right? If I debilitate him, nature will take its course. I can move on to the next guy, right? But most fights, the way people think of fighting, they don't work this way, right? When the reality of survival, any survival, wilderness survival, urban survival, whatever, right? Day-to-day survival, okay? It's all based on energy conservation, okay? He who has the most energy and resources left at the end of the foray, at the end of the challenge, wins, okay? Which is why in warfare, you cut off the enemy's supply lines, right? That's energy, man. That's food, that's bullets, that's medical supplies, whatever. You cut that shit off, right? Because he's now limited to what he has. And when that runs out, right, he's flocked, okay? So anyway, right? And I've talked about this one in the past a lot, right? Murphy's Law, right? There's this Murphy's Law. Everybody knows Murphy's Law, right? If something can go wrong, it will, okay? But there's a whole series, for those of us who were military and law enforcement and whatnot, there's a whole series of Murphy's Law of combat, okay? And one of those says that if the enemy is in range, so are you. So we're going to talk about that as we move along here, right? Because if that's true, how do we have any kind of an advantage, right? Well, you'd be faster, you'd be stronger, okay? Imagine being on a battlefield for 3 hours and not as an observer, okay? Everybody fantasizes about, being that samurai and swinging that sword, taking the enemy out, being the champion at the end, okay? How long will it take? How many minutes of nonstop swinging that how many pound implement or other things and fighting off somebody else's strength and all that until you are freaking wasted, right? You don't have strength left. You don't have speed left, okay? These are conditions we need to think about, right? And the ego doesn't want to think about it, which is why people start watching these things. And if they don't get bored because it's taking too long and the monkey's not demonstrating anything, right? They hop off because I hit a nerve, right? And it's easier to keep believing bullshit than it is to take the time and the effort and learn something, right? And besides that, who would want to learn from a guy who's old, fat, and bald? He can't possibly know anything. Yeah, well, there's the back button, right? So we'll talk about this idea with Murphy's Law here in a little bit as we go into different distances, right? So, but before we do that, let's dive into this my. For those of you who are quote unquote regulars, right? One thing you know about me is that I don't take anything at face value. I don't take anything at conventional simpleton translation. Okay, so what I want to do is take a look at. Now, today we're not going to look at the kanji, but we're going to take a look at this word mai, okay? Because it's, again, conventionally translated as distance, right? Spacing, that kind of thing, right? Okay? But does it? Okay? It's kind of close in arts like kendo, right? Where they use swords a lot and things, right? So they differentiate between ma and mai. Okay? Ma and mai, right? So ma, or ma is, again, commonly translated as distance or interval. Ma is the thing that means distance Okay. It can mean space, okay? Kind of implying like a gap, okay? Or an interval. I'm going to jump on interval here in a bit because interval isn't just a physical space, right? There's like a time element to that, okay? So I take a look at those, right? And then right? Be careful that you don't crisscross your kama or your kanji, okay? People often see things written out on Romaji and then guess. I used to do it, right? So I understand how easy it is to do, except that this is not I for love, I for harmony. It's not the same. It's not the same I in Aikido. It's not the same, okay? This kanji means suitable. Suitable, okay? So now what does mai mean, okay? It means at a very base level, suitable distance, suitable interval, okay? Suitable gap. Suitable for what? What you need it to be, okay? Suitable for the thing that you need, right? That you need it for, okay? So it's a condition of action, okay? It's one of those variables, okay? And I can see how it's easy for people to pick something that's fairly static, right? It's easily controlled, like memorizing or just sticking to kata, because it has a definitive beginning, a definitive end, and in most martial arts, there's only one right way to do it. Ego loves that shit, right? But if you've ever been in a real knockdown drag out or worse, right? Okay, I've had knives come at me. I had a bullet miss my head by a finger's width. It was my gun. Somebody went after it during an arrest, okay? And I moved just in time before it went off, and it was a 45 caliber. So if anybody knows weapons, yeah. So anyway, and anybody that ever tells you to worry about powder burns and whatnot in a self-defense situation, fuck powder burns, okay? Powder burns are highly overrated. You know when I felt powder burns on the side of my face from that discharge? A day and a half later, when the trauma was waning, and the adrenal response and the chemicals and whatnot were draining from my body, and I started to become more tactily aware of smaller things. And I started wondering how the hell I got sunburn on one side of my face, but not on the other, because I typically was the senior officer driving, which means I'm in the US, so we have left-hand drives, right? Not, UK and Australia, whatever, right? Which means I should have been sunburned on the left side of my face, right? And it took me a little bit to figure out, holy shit, powder burns, okay? Same thing with the bang, all that stuff, okay? The adrenals will change everything. So people sitting around a kitchen table or whatever bullshitting about what they would do if you've never been in it, whatever you're thinking is probably 180 degrees in the fucking wrong direction, okay? So, but suitable distance, okay? So, but before we dive into this too much, okay, let's take a look at most people, right? How many ranges are there, okay? Most people would say 3. Today, we're gonna look at 5, okay? 5 ranges, okay? I know, you didn't sign up for this one to hear the same shit you hear from everybody else, okay? So 5 ranges, okay? And these are, we're going to take a look at what to do and what's typically done at those ranges, okay? So again, most people focus on 3, but let's do this. 1, 2, 3. Look at that, Sensei, you can count. Yeah, I can even write numbers. Check that out, dancing monkey, okay? So the first one is we're going to call long range, okay? Also known as out of range. Okay, you're too far apart, okay? Too long, whatever you want to call it, right? Next one, right? This is in the purview of what most people think of, right? Long range, okay? Next one, mid range. Next one, yeah, see, I heard you. Close range, okay? Last one. Very close range. More you can break something down, come up with answers inside there, better off you're going to be. Okay, so let's take a look at these, right? I'll come back to long range because there's a mental aspect in everything that we do. Always, okay? But martial artists tend to be body oriented, right? If you've ever gone through any of my programs like Ninja Mind or the First 7 Steps on the Path of Buddha or anything like that, there's this one lesson of these 5 elements that make up a human body. And I don't mean like the Godai elements, right? There's form, feeling, perception or judgment, conceptualization, and consciousness, right? Soul's not there because this list is the things that you can directly work on. You can observe, you can follow, you can work on, right? As a part of that training, what you do is you figure out where you're strong and where you're not. And before you try to move forward, you do work that balances everything out. You stop working on the damn stuff you're already good at. Sounds like training, right? And you bring the negative stuff up so everything's now equal. Now you can move all of you forward, because if you don't, the only thing that's going to be moving forward is the same shit you're already good at, and you're not going to be able to figure out why you can't make headway fast enough, and it's because you're still dragging anchors behind you because part of you is still in conflict with another part of you. Okay, so anyway, right? So long range, right? What is long range? Let me change color here. Okay, long range is typically, and if you want to look at, if you want to really look at things that are deep like this, you need to look at martial arts, or you need to look at people who specialize, okay? Because in Kendo, they've got these ranges, right? And because Kendo deals with swords, right? Shinai, they'll talk about a range where the tips of the shinai are almost and maybe just slightly bumping, right? And then there's a range where they start to cross. And then there's a range that they're definitely crossed, right? But what they're looking at here is a range where you have to step, a range where you can shuffle, and a range where you don't have to do anything at all. So long range is typically, right? I'm going to crisscross striking and grappling and all that, right? So it's typically kicking range, right? Unless you've got stubby little legs and a normal torso, your legs are at least the length of the torso, right? But you can't step as far as you can reach with your leg to extend things out. So it's just the way the body works, right? So it's kicking range, right? But it's a range where you have to step. For those of you in the Bujinkan, right, this is the range for ski, right? Where I have to, or I'm forcing him to actually take a full step. And a lot of fighters that are kickers, what they'll do is they'll throw the kick, obviously trying to make it land, but if it doesn't, the leg goes down, and that clears a lot of extra space. So they don't have to step all the way through without doing something, okay? And this gets very variable. Right? In a little bit here, we're gonna not screw it up, but we're gonna take a look at how he could be at one range and you could be at a completely different range based on height, based on weapons, based on all kinds of stuff, okay? So mid-range is typically punching range, okay? And what I mean by this is like jab, crosses, those kind of things, right? But this is what I would call a shuffle step range, okay? So long range is either kicking, where I got to throw this leg forward and get him, or I'm going to step to strike. This range is where I can shuffle to get him, right? It just takes a little bit of an adjustment to get him, okay? Close range, right? Jabbing, right? You don't have to step here. Jabbing or grabbing, okay? Jabbing or grabbing range, right? The person doesn't have to do anything, but just grab a hold of you, right? And if there's a little bit of a movement with the foot or whatever, it's not like they have to reach out to get you, unless they're a one-hit wonder and all they ever do is grab, and they're grapplers. So they're going to overcommit to shit because that's all they know how to do, or that's all they're good at. Okay. So, which is why we learn kamae and evasion. And the first couple of moves, you should always just evade what he's doing. I don't give a shit how much you think you have him. I don't care how much you assume anything. I don't care how much you are just dying to do your freaking technique, right? You always, if you can, unless he's on you, you always avoid the first couple so that you can be a ninja and collect information and figure out what his fight style is. Okay? You let him tell you how to kick his ass. Don't guess. Right? Okay? Nothing worse than guessing and then being wrong. Right? At the pearly gates, let St. Peter know that. Okay? All right. So very close range, what we're looking at here is grappling range. I don't care if you're standing, sitting, kneeling, on the floor, facing Mecca, dance, I don't give a shit, right? But you're on each other, right? I mean, it's very, very, very close range, okay? So the problem with all of these, well, oh, sorry, let me go back to the long range, right? What is this? This is strategic assessment and planning range. Just because he can't reach you, you can't reach him, doesn't mean you shouldn't be paying attention and determining best entry angle, right? What kind of things does he normally throw? So where do I need to be so when he throws it, right, I know what my evasion thing is going to be, right? Okay, because the average person will show you what their preferences are very, very quickly within the first couple of seconds. They can't help themselves, right? Because of that imperative need, ego's driving, it's always worked for them, right? All the same shit that we're trying to ferret out for ourselves so that we don't trap ourselves. That's the average human being, okay? If you're looking for average, again, there's the back button, okay? So, but this is assessment range. Of course, that is worked into your skill or into your training, right? Assessment. What kind of fighter is he? Okay? So we'll talk about that as we go, all right? But the problems with conventional physical Mai, regardless of range, is that you're trading shots and basically fighting the same way. If you maintain this, then you have the same problem he does. You're going to be kicking, you're going to be stepping to reach, to grab each other, whatever, okay? Mid-range, right? You're going to be ducking punches, you're going to be doing shuffle steps, whatever. It's pretty much the same thing, right? Rare exception, right? If this guy here that likes to grab steps or shuffles to grab and overextends himself, he's not very strong when he grabs you. If you're panicking in that situation, he's either 30%, 20% or more taller than you, or broader than you, which makes him stronger than you, or you're still thinking in zeros and ones. You're still thinking in black and white. Okay? So the problem here is, again, right? Fighting the same way. Jabbing, grabbing distance, right? We're both grappling, right? We're both doing the same thing. Yeah, I guess you have to rely on being tricky, right? Or hoping for the best, right? So, but I think I'm going to make an assumption, and I hate making assumptions. I'm going to make an assumption that we're all in this for the same reasons. And I don't care what martial art you train in or what self-defense system you train in. I don't care if it's Krav Maga. I don't care if it's Taekwondo. I don't care, okay? My assumption is that you're trying to give yourself an advantage and you're trying to come at self-defense or fighting using a better way than what everybody else is doing. Because somewhere deep down inside or at the front of your head, you recognize that if you fight like everybody else, then he already knows what you're going to be doing. He's already dealt with it, so he has experience with it, right? Okay, so you're going to have a harder freaking job. Now, if you're in a sport contest, yep, you're both fighting the same way. Okay, it's a contest. Who's better at fighting this way? Okay, but if I can, from a self-defense perspective, if your skull gets close enough to me and I can stick my thumb in your orbital socket, I will grab your skull. Okay, you're gonna be that cool guy from what was that that movie? I don't know, Little China or something like that, right? Like I see Kurt Russell with a machine gun and the eye patch and stuff, right, or whatever. Okay, so but we're not talking about fighting, because I'm not the kind of guy that if you bump my shoulder, we have to throw hands, or you call my mom a name, we have to throw hands. That's just that's a 6-year-old in a grown-up's body. Okay, are there things that I will stand for, and if you cross that line, of course. Okay, but I also recognize that if I'm going to fight somebody, or if I'm going to engage in combat with somebody, right, that situation has to be worth dying for, going to the ER for, being taken out of my family's life for, losing everything I've worked hard to build for. Okay? Hatsumi Sensei, I started off with a quote by him, but his teacher, Takamasa Sensei, right, he used to always say, one, nobody in their right mind would choose to be a warrior. Okay? Up at 4 a.m., training with swords or whatever, in dew-soaked freaking grass, bare feet, sandals, whatever, right? Chafing armor, while all the other guys are in the village still sleeping, spooning with their honeys. But you know what? Somebody has to do it, right? But the real quote I want to give you is, he said, no one truly understands what it means to be a warrior, okay? A warrior, not necessarily just a paid soldier and not a fighter, a warrior, until that person has something to lose. People who have nothing to lose, fights give them bragging rights, fights give them a paycheck, fights give them a trophy, fights, okay? Anyway, right? Okay, so here's the question. Is there a better way, right? In ninjutsu, we have this term kudai dori, which again, it's roughly translated as taking the proper position, okay? But there's a lot to it, because kudai itself means murky or dark or whatever. It means that things are always changing and it's unsure, and you've got to find the way. You have to figure it out in the darkness, in all this chaos and all this uncertainty. Dori means to catch or seize, right? I'm going to catch the uncertainty, okay? But it has to do with being able to figure it out on the fly. That's why we had this primary principle within either lineages themselves as the core principle, or within certain techniques as a core principle that bleeds out over into everything else, which is to play in space, find the proper, or find the way, find the most natural way, that kind of thing, right? You've got to figure it out on the fly. But guys who always go toe to toe and always fight the same way, all they have to do is find little gaps in the sky because they're tied in, right? But guys that are grappling on the floor, if they're in a contest, if they're in a sport contest, nobody's going to come up and kick them in the spleen or stomp in their skull or whatever and help their friend. Nobody's going to come up from behind and stab them or shoot them, okay? But if you're training for self-defense, that better be freaking top of mind every time you do something, okay? If we're doing a restraint to hold somebody to the ground, these pins and restraints that you see all the time, okay? It's just as difficult for the person applying the lock, hold, or restraint to get out of that as it is for the person they're locking or restraining, because they're tying themselves to them. In the Shinden Fudo school, one of our 9 schools, we have those kind of locks and restraints too. Gyoko-ryu, right? That's one of the uses for Hicho, those kind of things, right? But you can get out in one move, okay? Because if you're just as fucked as he is, if the fight switches. Anyway, right? Okay, so I'm not covering kudai dori this lesson. We've done that in the past. We'll do it again in the future. But what I want to do is switch gears here just a little bit, because I want to look at, I'm going to borrow a phrase. There was a book that was written by Noma Hisashi, right? It's called Kendo Tokuhon. Tokuhon, okay? It means kendo reader, right? And again, I don't do kendo, I do kenjutsu. I don't do iaido, I do batto jutsu, right? They both involve swords, but for very different reasons, okay? So, but you can learn from anyone, because a master's a master's a master, okay? So he says, this is just a quote from the book, right? By using your mind, one should create a situation where, even if the physical distance between the enemy and yourself is the same, you put your enemy at a disadvantage and at the same time yourself in an advantage. Well, how the hell do we do that? You can't change physical distance, right? Or can you, right? So he continues by saying, many of the mysteries of are encompassed in an old teaching. For the enemy, it is far. For myself, it is near. So this contradicts Murphy's law that if the enemy is in range, so are you. There's a lot more going on, right? So in other words, even though we can define fairly easily, right? Quite simply, right? The fact is that when we square off with somebody, the perception of the physical distance, right? The spatial interval, right? Matters more than the actual physical distance. I'm going to say that again. The perception of the physical distance matters more than the actual distance. Okay? So if we can psychologically manipulate our opponent and their perception of the distance between you and them, then you have the upper hand. Okay? Right? So I'm trying to make this more clear, but that's why, right? This is a 30,000-foot strategy tactics lesson like it is every week. That's why we do these Friday virtual training. There's the URL, right? And we get to play off of these things with physical skills, right? So hop your ass over there, right? Show up on Friday and we'll take a look at more of these things, or don't and work it out for yourself. Okay. So, but more on this in a minute, more on this psychological thing in a minute. Okay. So here's the thing, right? The key to my mastery, the key is in understanding, whoops, choose a different color. Understanding his weapon, his reach, his style, right? His weapon, his reach, his style. This requires being a ninja. I don't care if you're actually training in ninjutsu or not. Okay? What's the ninja's greatest skill? Information gathering. The more information you do ahead of time and you add that to your training, right? It's one thing to be, and I did this, God, I've been doing martial arts since 1975. In most martial arts, they spend most of their time learning to defend against that same martial arts attacks. Meanwhile, out in the world, right, the MMA guys are laughing at us, the street gang thugs are laughing at us or whatever, because they don't play that game, okay? Whatever works, works, okay? So have you worked your skills, your kata, whatever, against an uppercut, against a right cross, against a back fist, right? Against a jab, jab, right cross, uppercut, whatever, right? I don't know. Can't speak for you. I don't know your context, okay? But the more I know about how different styles work, right? How the reach is different based on body makeup, okay? And what I mean by this, let's get rid of this. I knew I need extra space. Okay, so if we had three people standing next to each other, no, they're not without legs. I'll show you here in a minute. Okay, if we had three people standing next to each other and they were all the same height, I do this in seminars. I'll pull three guys out that are exactly the same height. Okay, and I'll ask everybody to look at them and tell me why I know that this guy can reach farther, this guy has a shorter reach, this guy, okay? And it's because of the relationship between I know, you're waiting with bated breath, right? The difference between torso length and leg length. You can have three people that are the same height. One will be relatively equal. My body proportions are about equal from shoulder to hips, and length of legs is about equal. But there's other people my height that have a longer torso and shorter legs. And there's other people that have a shorter torso and longer legs. All three of these people have a different reach. Okay? They all have a different reach. Okay? So if that's true about that, then what else might we be missing? Okay? So now it doesn't mean that they can't overstep, understep, whatever. Okay? But the reach is different. Okay? The reach is different. We haven't even gone into, some people have longer arms proportionate to their torso. My arms, my hands hang, right? Let me back up here just a little bit more, right? See where my hands hang? Just below the hip joint where the head of the femur plugs into the pelvic assembly. Just below that, okay? My teacher, one of my, not Hatsumi Sensei, one of the American teachers I had, right? His hands, he's got really long fingers, all that, right? He's my height. He's my height, okay? His finger, when he stands straight, his fingers go almost to his knee. All things being equal, but his torso is a little shorter, legs are a little bit longer, but his arms are longer. He has a different reach. Okay? So, anyway, right? So, let's see, let me borrow one of these things, right? There's this idea in ninjutsu, right, of concealing the length of the weapon, right? Because I want to take away his ability to gauge proper distance. Okay? Suitable distance. What's the suitable distance? Where is he safe, and up to what point should he be attacking? Okay? Because in the beginning, when we do obvious, we do things, right? In a lot of these things, he can see the length of your blade, right? And this is all beginner stuff, okay? Because they have to learn this first, okay? But we have these other kamae where the sword goes behind you, or the sword is pointed straight out in ichi, this kind of thing, or in kocho no kamae, right? Or there's even these ones where it's behind the ear kind of thing, right? The ninja have this one, right? Where it goes behind the body, okay? So all of them, the purpose is to hide the length of the blade, because if he knows the length of your blade, if he knows your reach, if he's good, okay, and he pays attention to that stuff, and he's not just thug, super thug or whatever, right? Just throwing hands and hoping for the best, right? Because he's trying to make a point, okay? If he knows the length of your weapon, if he knows your reach, if he knows your preferred techniques, he has the advantage before you've even engaged. He knows exactly where he needs to be to take you. Okay? We'll end on that note when we get there. But, okay, so there's some examples for the sword. Again, ichi, kocho, those kind of things, if you know them, okay? In the gyokko-ryus, ichimonji, right? I often talk about this position where it points at the cross-eyed shoulder and how it's difficult to grab, but I want you to see something. You know the length of my arms. It's much more difficult to know the length of my arms if I'm at this odd angle. This is at a weird angle, right? It's more difficult if I'm in this seigan. It's harder because your depth perception, the way your eyes and brain work, it's difficult, very difficult to know what that range is. Okay? So think about that when you're using these things. Instead of, the biggest mistake that people make with kamae is to think of them like stances. It's just something that I use to defend and launch my techniques with. Okay, well then that's all you're ever going to be able to do with it. Okay? But I need to screw up his planning. I need to screw up him. I need to screw him up here. Because when I affect that, I affect all the choices he makes in here. Right? Most people think of control from the perspective of force. A ninja thinks of control from the perspective of you affect his viewpoint, perspective, or belief about something. You, your fight style, whatever. Okay? Because when you affect their perspective, their view, their belief about something, You affect that, you control everything. You control their thoughts, their planning, their speech, their action, everything. That's cool shit. Okay. Of course, you can't learn that in a book, but anyway. All right. So we got those with the long staff or whatever, right? We've got this gedan no kamae where it's behind you, right? This way. Got a little bit of a tip out here, right? It's like a seigan, but it's behind you, right? You're hiding the length of the weapon. Okay. So again, we're going to be discussing during this Friday's virtual class. We're going to be looking at how the distance we use changes. We're going to look at it two ways, right? We're going to be looking at how distance changes with advancing skill development and proficiency and the student's comfort level, right? But we're also going to take a look at how to do the same kata in these three ranges. Okay, Ichimonji no kata, whatever, because people just get stale. They do it the same way, and then they get satisfied with themselves. Okay, for the last couple of weeks, I've been harping on this thing called the hierarchy of competency, right? And the third tier up, after we've come from being blinded and uncoordinated and all that kind of shit, and we get to this conscious competency. I know what it's supposed to look like, and I can do that. That's where most people stop, because ego's satisfied. Okay? But in the fight, when shit's moving too fast for you to left brain think about it, if you're not up in the realm of unconscious competency, where you have this stuff so wired into your system, you don't have to think about it anymore, then, well, you're going to have to think about it. And if you have to think about it, it's going to slow you down. Okay? All right. So back to what I was alluding to earlier. Okay? I don't have a space up here for it, right? There is also a mental aspect of my. Okay? There is a mental aspect. Okay? All the way back up here. Interval, gap, distance. Okay? What we're talking about is thoughts. Okay? And this is what the Kendo masters were alluding to in that quote and some other stuff that I have. The interval or the psychological glitches, gaps, or lapses in attention or focus. Okay? Which is why we do little distractions, whatever, right? If I catch someone and their mind goes to catching their balance, or I distract them, right? And they get slapped, their head gets knocked to the side, and they've got to bring their eyeballs back to see. In that gap, that provides me an opportunity to move. This is how we beat it when the interval is equal, when the distance. We can't do anything about the physical distance. Okay? Even if we're talking about reach, we have a certain physical space between us. Even if I slip his punch and his hand's behind me, right? I can touch him or whatever, right? We're still trading shots. So what I need to do is take advantage of these little gaps, okay? And here's an example, and we're going to do way more on Friday. But let's say we're doing just a base model of applying uragyaku, right? This inside wrist reversal, right? So he reaches out, grabs the lapel. What most people will do is step back to take the hand, break the grip, move it over, which is perfectly fine well, it's not perfectly fine. It's okay in the early stages of training where you're learning the step by step. Okay. But when I was taught this, I was taught as it comes in, I catch this. There's other things for that. But as I step back to take his hand, my hand passes by his eyes, or my hand stabs out at his eyes, or my hand passes by and it pops him in the side of the face, and then I grab the hand. Why? Because I'm creating a psychological gap. When I bring my hand up to either physically touch him, pass by close enough that I get a flinch response, and if I don't, then I pop him. During that moment, he's dealing with and recovering from what I just did. So in the moment he does this, that's my smoke screen to take his hand. So by the time I take his hand, by the time he realizes that I've taken his hand, it's already too late. I have it. And he starts to pull away or do other things, right? So we're always doing little things to affect the psychological mai in between each move in that kata, each move in that form, because that's how you get from point A to point B without experiencing resistance, without him trying to escape, without him trying to beat your move. He's busy doing something else. So I always tell my students, you don't do anything until and unless he's busy doing something else, like missing, right? In Jumonji no Kata, punch comes in, I shift and I hit that arm. It doesn't move very far. It doesn't have to move very far, right? I created a pain response, and that's my smoke screen to hit the ribs, right? As I hit the ribs and his body flinches this way, right? That now I'm getting this up in front of his eyes, because every one of those moves is creating a situation where I'm stalling the next punch. Everybody looks at, and this is okay in the beginning, right? But what the hell are we doing? He's not going to throw this and then just fucking pause so we can do the rest of the kata, right? As soon as he misses this next one, and this one's probably on its way before this even stops, right? He's realized, and it's coming on its way, right? I mean, how fast can you throw 2 punches? Boom, right? So I need to disrupt. So Jumonji no Kata at one level is teaching me 3 different ways to disrupt this follow-up punch. Otherwise, I can just move, he'll miss. So while he's busy missing, I pop that pressure point, hit Hoshi, okay? And then I immediately, while he's smoked by Hoshi, boom, catch Butsumetsu, okay? And then as soon as I hit Butsumetsu, boom, hands right up in front of his face, because I'm stalling. It's a hit and run technique, but I've got 3 different methods in a chain, boom, 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 to stall the follow-up punch. So by the time he throws it, there's some confusion going on, all that kind of cool stuff. But at the same time, once I get that base model, then I can start looking at, oh, check this out, boom, boom. I can move in because his arm got stalled in mid-punch. I can move in and catch it for a ganseki. I can, whatever it happens to be in space, I can start. Okay? A cool exercise for those of you who have been around for a while is take your kyonopo and string them together as though the end of one didn't quite work as well as it should have, and something else is there, and so you're going to catch the next one. I don't mean you're going to do Jumonji, then Hicho, then, okay? But you can put, okay, for another class. Anyway, right? So we're taking advantage of these gaps, right? And listen to my words. We're attacking within the gap. If you cause the gap and you pause for a quarter of a second and then you move, he was recovering as you're coming in. I need to execute when I cause the gap. I'm moving inside the gap. Ninjutsu, art of invisibility. Not throw a cheesy ass Hollywood smoke bomb and then disappear. I mean in the middle of every move. While you're doing the move, while you're doing your attack, catching his hand, delivering a shot, whatever, he never sees it coming because his mind has either glitched and it's in duh mode, or he's looking at something else. Okay? You attack from within. So think of every little thing that you're doing as a smoke screen for the next move, and you're timing, right? So now the interval is the timing between your moves, right? There's a mai in between each move, okay? From here to here, there's a space, there's a time, right? What could I be doing within there or not doing, right? So that I can catch him. Well, for this one, I just wait until the last possible second, okay? When his brain assumes landing and he, right? And then I move, okay? He'll never see you move because we human beings live a quarter of a second in the past because of the processing time it takes for one of our sense receptors to pick up data, the brain to translate it, recognize it, and then act on it. But even before the acting on, right? We live about a quarter of a second in the past. Okay? So all the realists Better get real about what's really happening, right? So, but once you know these things, so this is cool shit, man. This stuff being passed down and science, modern science, is validating thousands of year old stuff. That makes me ask this question: who the fuck were these guys? Because they didn't have electron microscopes and shit to figure things out, right? They watched Bob die or Yamamoto die, whatever, right? Okay. So anyway, what this really comes down to is you have a choice, right? Thug fight like everybody else or practically everybody else and take your chances, or learn the lessons that'll take you into completely different realms so you can fight smarter, not harder. And I'm going to finish up here by borrowing a mantra from that from Kendo, right? Which is don't strike and then win, win and then strike. It's a completely different way of thinking. Right? Most people try to get tricky about the way they do things, do the same techniques to try to catch the other guy off guard. Why don't we just throw him off guard first and then attack when he can't do anything about it? Anyway, we'll go into more of this on Friday. If you're watching this way past Friday, October 27th, you'll miss that class. But we have classes every Friday. There's the URL, onlineninjaacademy.com/Friday-virtual-training. It's $5, $4.99, and it just covers my expenses that I have for the service and upload and download shit and all kinds of stuff, right? It's just, right? But we're going to be covering some models and examples. And if you make it, great. I'd love to see it. And if not, no harm, no foul. Okay? But anyway, that's what I have. Take a screenshot, right? So you have your notes. All right? That's it for this week. I will talk to you again next week on Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. Be safe. Have a great rest of your week. Train hard.